We want to create an experience in which we unpack this idea that we call organic kingdom bringing. And really what we mean by that is the permission that Jesus gives us to serve him, not by doing a bunch of religious stuff, what some people might call a religious treadmill, but by being a different kind of person in our everyday, organic, mundane life. So this idea of organic kingdom bringing for us is this idea that like serving Jesus and bringing heaven to earth, it's not about running off and doing foreign stuff or even running off into other places and building new relationships with people we don't already have a relationship with, so much as it's about having a different presence about us where we already live our lives, among the people we already live our lives among. I can still remember when I had my aha moment, if you will, of kingdom bringing. Teresa and I were sitting in our car at the curb in front of our house, and I'm thinking we must have been talking about our neighbor Mary. The context of what was going on in our lives at this point was that we were busy doing church, really. I was on staff at a really great church, leading a 20-something ministry as well as a high school ministry. And so the reality is we spent Wednesday night doing church for high school students and Sunday nights doing church for 20-somethings and everything that comes with doing that with leadership teams and just pouring into people and building relationships. And don't get me wrong, we were loving it, loving the people, loving the communities we were part of. But at the same time, we were learning this stuff about what it means to be a disciple. And really we were learning that Jesus' ultimate hope for us and his ultimate goal for disciples, it's not just people who are like knowledgeable about all the right information, but people who serve. Like that Jesus was raising up servants, people who would recognize needs around them and selflessly serve others, what our friend Brian Hopkins calls putting a serving towel over your arm. And so here we were at this point in our life where we were as busy as we could possibly be doing church, and we were getting more and more challenged every day about just meeting the needs as they come up around us. Mary was one of those needs that we began to observe, our neighbor Mary. Mary, she was 80, she was in a wheelchair, she had a son that visited her once every few weeks. She had home medical care people that came, it seemed like every day, Meals on Wheels every once in a while. And so because of the stuff that God had been teaching us, we began to think more and more about ways that we could serve Mary. We began to observe that the paint was literally falling off of her house. We began to observe that whenever there was a storm, we literally picked up shingles in our backyard. The grass in her backyard was up to our knees. We started to think, like, what would it be like to have Mary over for dinner? What would it be like to rally a group of friends to help paint her house? And what would it be like to actually help her with her yard work? And so on this particular day, our aha moment consisted of this. I think we realized that for months now, we've been talking about serving Mary. We've been talking about just loving Mary. And we were realizing that we've been talking about it for months and we hadn't done anything. And we hadn't done anything for a really simple reason. Because we were busy doing church. We were spending so much time doing church that we didn't have time to be the church for people like Mary who were already a part of our lives. And that's when we began observing in the text this idea that Jesus just simply asks us and invites us to serve him and to bring heaven to earth by serving very organically in the places where we are already living our lives. Not that we don't ever serve in the institutional stuff, but not at the expense of all of the organic stuff. I mean, you could ask some questions, and I've got all these questions that flow through my head in this regard. Like, what if serving Jesus, what if bringing heaven to earth isn't nearly as complicated as we so often make it? What if your existing neighbors, friends, coworkers, and classmates collectively give you ample opportunity for your life to make a difference, for you to do the things with your life that Jesus calls you to do? What if being a good servant doesn't necessarily require that we run off to church and run off to organizations and gatherings that have a cross in the logo, so to speak? Like, what if being a good disciple, a good servant, involves just having a different presence and meeting needs in your everyday, organic life? One of the central questions that any student of Jesus must deal with is this: is Jesus' goal to extract me from the culture at large and effectively convert me to a separate subculture? Is that what is meant by holy, righteous, and set apart? Or is Jesus' goal to transform and equip me in order that I become a certain kind of person in my everyday, organic world? In other words, does Jesus call me out of my organic culture, or does he actually ask me to stay and exist differently? Our answers to these questions matter a great deal. Movements that reduce the goal to acclimating people to a subculture effectively remove them from the culture at large by keeping their adherents busy participating in sanctioned religious activities. Think Oompa Loompas. You may see them out and about, but they're completely detached from anything and anyone not directly related to their little subculture. They're people completely absent from the culture in which they sit.
Are they real people?
Of course they're real people. They're Oompa Loompas.
Absent means we become busy to the extent that we completely miss the opportunities to serve God that come up in our everyday lives. Absent means that when the guy that sits in the cubicle next to us tells us he's moving this weekend, the thought of, hey, can I help, doesn't even cross our minds. Perhaps because we already have a whole host of church things that we're going to do to serve Jesus that weekend. Absent means that when we drop our kid off at soccer practice, we're too busy to walk him up to the actual practice and ask the coach if we can help that day. Absent means that when some longtime friends of ours or even just some coworkers share with us that they're having a hard time in marriage, the thought of, hey, we'll watch your kids so you can have a date night, it doesn't even cross our minds because our lives are already busy.
My dear, you cannot live in isolation from the human race, you know.
Absent is this idea that we're surrounded by opportunities to be Jesus. We're surrounded by opportunities to make a difference. But we're just naive to them. We miss them. We're either so busy doing religious stuff that we can't see them, or we're so busy doing religious stuff that we just simply can't take advantage of them.
Where have you been?
I've been gone because I had a lot of churchy opportunities lately.
So we become absent to the people we work with, absent to the people that our kids go to school with, absent to our own families at times, absent to the people that we work out next to at the Y. I mean, we just become completely absent. Like, yeah, sure, we're in culture, we're going to work, we're going to restaurants, but we don't have the ability to either recognize needs as they just come up organically, or the time to actually meet them. In extreme cases, former friends and colleagues determine that their former friend turned religious devotee has joined a cult.
Praise God! Praise the Lord! Praise God!
More realistic, however, is that coworkers, friends, and family members slowly realize that the devotee has found religion.
Well, folks in Gatlin's got religion. They don't cotton to outsiders, and they probably won't have a phone there either.
What likely follows is resentment over the emotional detachment that has taken over the relationship.
All right, you mutinous, disloyal, computerized half-breed. We'll see about you deserting my ship.
Eventually, former friends will refer to this person as an extreme fundamentalist behind their back, and will grow slowly bitter towards both their former friend as well as their spirituality. For the extracted person, the fact is that slowly but surely they do become emotionally detached from their former friends and family members. In their mind, they've simply dedicated their life to their newfound purpose.
Bobby, it's gotten to you now.
Nothing's gotten me. I just want to look like a woman and keep my house looking decent, too.
And you're not going to leave Stepford either, are you?
Leave Stepford? Good schools, low taxes, clean air.
What this means is that adherents will have very little, if any, effect on the culture at large, simply because they're so busy jumping through the right hoops, running on the treadmill of religious performance, that they don't have time to make a difference in the culture at large. All this means that the opportunity to be God's hands and feet in the world goes unrealized. Some of you have probably lost friends to this mentality of religiosity. Some of us, probably most of us, have actually ditched friends at some point in our lives because of this mentality. Some of us are like avoiding Jesus because we've observed that to decide to follow him and even to serve him requires that all of a sudden we dedicate large amounts of times to serving and be a part of these sanctioned church activities, and we're just frankly unwilling. Some of us are here right now, and either you're here right now and you don't realize it, or you're here right now and there's this sense of like, yeah, I'm here, and you know you're here if just the the observation that you're so busy doing church that you don't have time to be the church rings true. Like, you know you're here if you're constantly running off to do good stuff, like stuff in Jesus' name. But the reality is that also means that you're way too busy to serve the people that are around you every day, at work and at home and in your neighborhood. There's this picture in my head, and I don't know if I can make it make sense, but I'm going to try. This picture that says that what if, because of the way we've painted serving Jesus, the average person views serving him the way we view an infomercial with a new exercise machine.
You can do it! Go for it! You're in dance! Come on, work out!
Now, stick with me. But when you see that infomercial with the supermodel on the little swinger thing or whatever it is that they're working out on, and the promise of the infomercial is 20 minutes. 20 minutes, 5 days a week, and in 6 months you'll look like this. Like your natural cynical reaction is, that's not true. Nobody believes that when they watch these infomercials. And in your head, you know that the reality of the situation is that to look like that, I mean, to have a body that deserved to be in the swimsuit edition or a body fitting of being in the NFL, like to look like that, that's not 20 minutes a day. Like that's several hours a day, and not to mention the change of diet and everything else that would come with looking like that. So we see those infomercials, particularly the exercise infomercials, and we go, it's not true. Like I don't have the time to look like that. I wonder if that's how many of our friends and family, and even many of us, the way we view actually serving Jesus. If we haven't created a perception that really serving him and really being an obedient servant and really living the life Jesus wants us to live actually requires that we spend way more time than any of us have off doing religious stuff, at countless meetings and being a part of countless ministries, doing any number of things serving Jesus. And so the average person, when we start talking about serving Jesus, they go, I don't have time. I don't have time to be an obedient disciple. I don't have time to really serve Jesus. I've got a family. I've got a job. I live way out of town. I've got a business. So I wonder if people view that invitation from Jesus the way they view the exercise infomercial. Like, it's not realistic. Does Jesus find it tragic that there's so many people surrounded by opportunities every day to be relevant and to be him in their world, and yet they've concluded they don't have time to be a servant. They don't have time to be the kind of person he calls them to be. Like, does it bug Jesus? Does it irritate Jesus that we've created this perception that serving him isn't something normal people can do? It's not something we can do in our everyday lives. It's not something we can do without somehow carving out a couple hours a day or handfuls of hours a week to actually run off and add more activity to our life. What if becoming fully devoted to Jesus doesn't require that you volunteer at church for 10 hours a week? What if you don't need to attend 3 Bible studies a week? What if doing so actually compromises God's desires for your life? What if it doesn't require that you quit the softball team so you can make it to Bible study? What if bringing heaven to earth and being heavily involved in a local club are not mutually exclusive? What if becoming the disciple and kingdom bringer that God dreams of you becoming involves existing in your organic world differently? There's several places in the text where we can go to observe this idea that Jesus is looking for disciples who will just have a different presence about them in their everyday lives. The first one that stands out to me is in the book of Luke. In Luke chapter 3 is where we run into John the Baptist, who was this kind of wild-eyed, hair straight up, beetle-eating dude. His job was to prepare the way for Jesus. And there's this moment where these people are coming to John the Baptist and they're repenting. It's this idea that they're coming and they're acknowledging their brokenness and their need to reconnect with God and to learn from him how to live. Now, I'm going to read to you a little bit from that. John said to the crowds coming out to be baptized by him, "You brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the coming wrath? Produce fruit in keeping with repentance. And do not begin to say to yourselves, 'We have Abraham as our father.' For I tell you, out of these stones God can raise up children for Abraham. The axe is already at the root of the trees, and every tree that does not produce good fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire." "What should we do then?" the crowd asked. John answered, "The man with 2 tunics should share with him who has none, and the one who has food should do the same. Tax collectors also came to be baptized. Teacher, they asked, what should we do? Don't collect any more than you are required to, he told them. Then some soldiers asked him, and what should we do? Don't extort money, and don't accuse people falsely. Be content with your pay. So these people, they're coming and they're going like, what does it look like to follow Jesus? What does it look like to be obedient? And it's this really simple thing. He says to one person, hey, well, if you're a soldier, be a just soldier. And he says to another guy, if you've got 2 tunics, well, give one away. And to the tax collector, he says, well, continue to do your job justly. If Jesus was about religious pomp and circumstance, why didn't John tell them to go pray or to go fast or to go read their Bibles as a means of producing fruit in keeping with repentance? John didn't tell them to go anywhere different or to acquire any new skills or to meet any new people. He simply invited them to exist in their organic world differently. What if serving Jesus starts by existing differently in the world in which you already live? What if God doesn't limit your kingdom bringing to leaving work to go to a Bible study, but says, serve me at work? The other day I was talking to my friend who is a retired social worker, literally spent the bulk of his life serving in particular young kids and families. In fact, for a major part of his social work, him and his wife led group homes where they lived with kids who had been taken away from their parents. He said to me, Adam, in all my life, and he's been following Jesus for a long time too, in all my life, in all my professional career, I've never before thought of the social work that I did as kingdom bringing. Like I never before thought of serving those kids and their families as gospel work. It never occurred to me. The irony of it was that as we're sitting there having lunch, his phone rang, and he answered his phone, and I'm picking all this up as this is happening, and on the other end is a guy who he's told me about before who lives in Canada, who was at one time in his group home. So here we are, it's probably 20 years removed from when this kid lived with him. I'm sitting at lunch with him. He's telling me, I've never thought of my social work as gospel work, as serving Jesus. And this guy's calling him 20 years later and having a conversation with him. Like how tragic is that we've so invalidated our everyday lives and so, well, we've invalidated that serving God and bringing heaven to earth can happen in our ordinary everyday lives. There's another exchange that happens in the book of Exodus that really paints this picture for me. There's this place where you may recall as God is leading Israel out of Egypt, there's this one instance where God and Pharaoh are kind of playing kung fu with one another, because Pharaoh keeps saying, hey, those people are mine. They need to stay here. They work for me. And God keeps insisting through Moses, no. You need to let those people go so they can come worship me. And Pharaoh gets mad and he says, no, they're mine. I'm going to increase their work because they work for me. And God says, no, you need to release them so they can go out and worship me. Well, the crazy thing is that word that Pharaoh's using for work and the word that God is using for worship, it's this Hebrew word avad. And I'm not Hebrew, so I probably mispronounced it, but it's both the same word. So literally, Pharaoh is saying, no, they work for me. And God is going, no, they're going to start working for me. Which gets into some of what Paul says about doing everything as though working for the Lord. The idea being, like serving God, working for God, you don't have to go anywhere. You just have to do what you already do with a different mentality, with a different set of eyes, with a different set of ambitions and goals and aspirations. I mean, it gets into why when Paul says to women, hey, if your husbands don't believe, just stay where you're at. Be a different kind of person. Elsewhere he says, hey, like wherever you were, whatever you were doing when you gave your life to Jesus, when you started serving Jesus, just stay there. There's this incredible validation in the text that says, hey, you work for God. Your worship, it comes in your ordinary everyday life, and there's plenty of opportunities in that. There's actually one more instance that I think is worth looking at. It comes in Matthew 23. And again, I'm going to read that Matthew 23, if you're not familiar with it, it's when Jesus lets the people that he's frustrated with kind of have it. And it starts this way. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, so you must obey them and do everything they tell you. But do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy loads and put them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them." Scholars note here that central to what frustrated Jesus was this idea that the religious establishment of his day had created so many religious nuances, so many religious requirements, that for the average Jewish woman or the average Jewish man, it would have been impossible to be a good servant of God. Like they had created so many things that people needed to do on a daily basis that the normal person simply didn't have time to do it all. And so Jesus' fury, his frustration with the establishment is, you guys have so encumbered serving me. You've made it so complicated and so complex that the average guy, the guy who has to support a family and who has a job, who has to help in the family business, he can't possibly feel good about where he's at in serving God because he doesn't have time to do all the stuff that you're saying he has to do to feel good about his serving of God. Heavy loads, Jesus calls them. Heavy, burdensome loads. So we could go on and on. But suffice it to say that the text, if you look at it with a different lens, paints this picture not of running off and adding a whole bunch of new activity and a whole bunch of new relationships to our lives, but living in the world we live in with a different set of eyes. Hearing cries, seeing needs, meeting needs in the world we live in every day.
Take me out of here. Don't wanna fight, don't wanna die, just wanna hear you cry. Who's gonna throw the very first stone? Oh, who's gonna reset the bone? Walking with your hand in a sling, wanna hear the soldiers sing. Working for the church while my family dies. Your little baby sister's gonna lose her mind. Every spark of friendship and love will die without a home. Hear the soldier groan, we'll go at it alone.
We have an organist capable of stirring the soul.
So where does this land? I think we need to look at one more narrative in the Gospels that I think really helps this land real practically. Luke 10:25. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What's written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You've answered correctly," Jesus said. "Do this and you will live." But the man wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. When he fell into the hands of robbers, they stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going by down the same road. When he saw the man, he passed by on the other side." One of the interesting things to note is that passed by on the other side is a relative statement, because we now know archaeologically that road was just a few feet wide. So passing by actually kind of meant climbing over. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wound, pouring oil and wine on them. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said, "and when I return I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have had." "Which of these 2 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" Jesus asked. The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." "Go and do likewise," Jesus said. Again, what different scholars have helped me to see here, and certainly there's a lot going on here that we're not going to unpack now, but you have 2 religious people. They pass by this guy, and some speculate that they passed by because they had duties that they needed to take care of, and the third guy doesn't. What's worth pointing out, and the reason I bring this up right now, is that the third guy, the Samaritan, he was the only one willing to allow his plans for the day to get interrupted. Like, sure, there must have been a lot going on in his heart, and Jesus is illustrating a lot, but one of the simplest things about what made him the good Samaritan was his willingness to see a need at the spur of a moment, to allow his plans for the day to get interrupted, to, as we've been saying, to recognize an organic opportunity to bring heaven to earth, and then to make the necessary sacrifices to make that happen. A friend of ours was recently in an accident that put him in the hospital for a week and basically confined him to a bed for several weeks after that. One day it hit us. Hey, we could take turns taking them dinner every other night for a few weeks, just to bear a little of their burden. That's organic kingdom bringing, responding to a need as it presented itself. Another gal volunteered at God's Love and noticed their donation center was a disaster, so she organized a group of 10 or so friends, and on one Saturday morning they organized the room for them. That's organic kingdom bringing, paying attention to needs that arise through everyday life. Another gal heard that a friend had a doctor's appointment and offered to watch her kids while she was there. Again, that's what organic kingdom bringing looks like. What if you and your family set aside money every month? Not just your local church tithe, but extra, so that you can bless people that you work with and people you live near when they have needs? What if you had the single mom who lives nearby over for dinner? What if you offered to watch her kids? What if you offered to help her fix her car? What if you made it a point to have some couple that you don't necessarily know, that isn't even necessarily part of church, that you work with, or your kids play sports with them, or their kids are in your kids' class, or you work out with them at the gym? What if you just made a point to have a random couple over, a random person over for dinner once a week? What if constantly running off from our organic lives to serve God in different religious activities, to be part of different church and religious functions, which aren't in and of themselves bad, but what if constantly running off to serve God, all while being surrounded by opportunities all around us? It's kind of like sitting in front of an amazing, beautiful waterfall and painting a paint-by-numbers unicorn picture. We're surrounded every day by these incredible opportunities, maybe not dramatic, but opportunities nonetheless, to serve God. But we run off and do the inorganic stuff. Just like I've been surrounded by a beautiful waterfall in nature, and I've been painting a paint-by-number unicorn.